it's Lynn, and today I'm coming at ya with a book review for Hunchback by Saou Ichikawa, a Japanese novella so compact and so sharp it practically leaves a paper cut on your soul. At barely 100 pages, this is the kind of book that could fit inside your coat pocket, and yet somehow manages to be denser, thornier, and more philosophically combustible than novels three times its size. I read it in one sitting, which is either a testament to its ferocious momentum or to my complete inability to stop when something has me by the collar. Probably both. Now let's meet Shaka Izawa, the protagonist. She is a woman whose spine curves like a question mark aimed squarely at Japanese society and who has absolutely zero interest in your pity. Born with a congenital muscle disorder that has left her with severe spinal curvature, Shaka spends her days in a care home outside Tokyo, tethered to an electric wheelchair and a ventilator, which one might assume would make for a rather uneventful existence. And one would assume incredibly wrong because her quick, mischievous, and deeply formidable mind operates without any such physical constraints. She takes e-learning courses on her iPad, publishes explicit fantasies on websites, and anonymous troll tweets into the digital ether just to see who flinches. She is, in the most glorious sense, extremely online and entirely ungovernable, a full, magnificent, chaotic human being in a world desperately trying to flatten her into a symbol of either tragedy or inspiration, and she refuses both comprehensively. And if that setup sounds already like a lot to hold, the novel obliges by escalating immediately. Shaka, with the particular audacity of someone who has long since stopped caring what the world thinks of her desires, tweets an offer of an enormous sum of money for a sperm donor into the void, as one does, and to absolutely no one's narrative convenience, her nurse accepts the dare. What follows is a chain of events that dismantles every comfortable assumption the reader might have brought to the story about disability, desire, consent, autonomy, and the particular cruelty of a society that has decided quietly and without consultation that certain bodies are simply not sexual. Ichikawa does not let that assumption sit comfortably for a single page. She picks it up, examines it from every angle, and then sets it on fire with a calm, methodical energy of someone who has been waiting a very long time to do exactly that. It is worth pausing here to note who Saou Ichikawa is because it matters enormously to how this book lands. Ichikawa herself has congenital myopathy, the same condition as Shaka, and uses a ventilator and an electric wheelchair. She accepted the Akutagawa Prize, Japan's most prestigious literary award, from that wheelchair, speaking in short sentences while pressing a tracheostomy connector button. She was the first disabled author in the prize's nearly 90-year history to win it. She has said that Hunchback is roughly 30% autobiographical, which means 70% of it is Ichikawa constructing with extraordinary deliberateness the story she needed to tell that her own life alone could not contain. She wrote this book, she has said, as revenge. Every page has the precision and fury of someone who has been politely underestimated her entire life and has finally, spectacularly decided to put all of that in writing. So, let's talk about things that I genuinely admired about this book. The prose is crisp, angular, and almost defiant in its economy. Ichikawa does not waste a word, which is a rare quality in any writer and a particularly impressive one in a debut. The hook grabs you within the first paragraph and refuses to release you. And Shaka, as a narrator, is immediately and completely magnetic. She is prickly, erotic, philosophical, furious, and deeply human in all the ways society would prefer she wasn't. Reading her is a little like being handed a mirror that reflects something you didn't know was there. The novella's early momentum is electric, the kind of reading experience where you keep glancing at the page count, not because you're bored, but because you're genuinely afraid it will end before you or it is ready to. And the representation Of course, I want to spend some real time here because it deserves it. It is startlingly, almost shockingly rare to encounter a disabled narrator written not as a vessel for inspiration, not as a cautionary tale, not as a background figure whose function is to make the able bodied characters feel something, but as a fully realized, sexually autonomous, philosophically combative, deeply interior person who simply lives on the page. Shaka is not here to teach anyone a lesson about resilience. She is not noble. She is not grateful. She is not a symbol. She is a woman with desires and resentments and intellectual obsessions and a very specific, very earned kind of rage. And Ichikawa writes all of that with authenticity of someone who does not need to imagine it. That is not a small achievement. That is, in fact, a rather enormous one. And it is the reason this book has been called one of the most important works of Japanese literature of the 21st century. I think that assessment is completely difficult to argue with. What also works, and works beautifully, is the intellectual architecture underneath the story. Hunchback is not merely a character study. It is a philosophical provocation woven through with the history of disability activism in Japan, with Nietzschean concepts of resentment, with the politics of reproductive rights for disabled women, with the question of who is permitted to want things and who is expected to simply endure. Ichikawa weaves all of this into Shaka's interior monologue with the ease of someone who has been living inside these ideas for years, which, of course, she has. The effect is a novel that is simultaneously intimate and expansive. One woman's life in a care home that somehow also contains the whole architecture of ableist society. That is a very difficult thing to pull off, and Ichikawa definitely pulls it off. But then, and here is where things get a little bit complicated, comes the turn. And if you have read this book, you already know exactly which moment I'm referring to. The one that arrives like a thunderclap in a room you thought you had completely and entirely figured out. It is shocking in the most visceral, put the book down and stare at the wall sense, both literally and figuratively, and I mean that in every possible dimension of those words. I did not see it coming. Not even a little. It reshuffles the entire deck of everything you thought you understood about Shaka, about the story, about what kind of novel you were reading. And it does so with the calm, unblinking audacity of a writer who knew exactly what she was doing and is not interested in your comfort. The problem is that after reshuffling the deck so dramatically, Ichikawa doesn't quite deal the next hand cleanly. The ending drifts into a sort of fog of ambiguity so thick that even the most dedicated, most charitable, most close reading corners of the internet are collectively squinting at their pages going, what did I just read? And I did my due diligence. I went down the rabbit hole of literary forums and reader discussions and translated interviews, and it turns out most of us are on a similar confused boat, paddling through the same murky waters, wondering whether we missed something fundamental or whether the obliqueness was entirely deliberately the point. It is the kind of conclusion that feels profound right up until the moment you realize you cannot articulate why, which, depending on your literary patience, is either a bold and intentional artistic choice or a dinner party guest who leaves before explaining the punchline. I genuinely cannot tell you which. I have read the ending twice, trying to figure out what it was, and I am still not sure. And so with all of that sitting together, the electric prose and the groundbreaking representation and the uncompromising intellectual ambition on one side and the unresolved ending and the narrative fog on the other, Hunchback is, for me, a book that is considerably easier to admire than to love. There is a gap between those two things, between admiration and love, and sometimes that gap is the loneliest distance in all of literature. The ambition is here, the voice is here, the cultural necessity and urgency are here in abundance, but the emotional payoff slips through the fingers at precisely the moment you need it most. for a debut this audacious, this formally inventive, and this willing to go where almost no one has gone before, that is both a frustration and a kind of tribute. Hunchback contains somewhere inside it the bones, appropriately enough, of something even greater than what it already is. And so I give it 3 out of 5 stars with a great deal of respect, a genuine sense of awe, and at least a bajillion unanswered questions I expect to be sitting with for quite some time. If you've read it, please come and find me in the comments, because I have thoughts and I need people to have them with. And if you haven't yet, it is 100 pages. The time investment is minimal, the conversation potential is enormous, and I still strongly recommend it. And so with all that said, thank you so much for watching. You are awesome. Stay awesome, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.